Satya's approach was, this is an issue that we actually need to solve. What if we fix that? What if we had a way that every organization, whether you're marketing or sales or finance, had the exact same data?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the first ever Collective Conversation. Collective Conversations are going to be conversations that we have with accounting, finance, FP&A leaders in a lot of different industries all across the world to help share their insights, their perspective, their knowledge, and everything around FP&A. My name is Chris Ortega. I'm going to be the podcast host for this. I'm the FP&A principal with Collective. And I'm excited to kick off our first collective conversation with Jesse Todd. Jesse Todd is 13 years at Microsoft. He's the group finance manager for the finance, data, and experience teams at Microsoft. Super knowledgeable in FP&A automation, increasing the value proposition of FP&A, and has extensive backgrounds in this. So without further ado, I want to kick off our first collective conversation and introduce Jesse Todd. Jesse, nice to have you on the podcast here today.
All right, Christopher, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Good. So, let's kick it right off. So the first icebreaker question I want to ask, and I like asking a lot of people this because in my thought leadership, and people ask me the same question. When you think of FP&A, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think about FP&A?
Impact. Yeah, for me, and that's really what am I trying to do through FP&A? The reason why every finance role that I've ever had has been an FP&A type role. There's a whole bunch of finance that I've never done, but I've always been in an FP&A type role. And the reason why I've gravitated to that is because I love working with business partners, solving problems, working through complexity, and trying to help the company make decisions that are tied to strategy. That strategy word has always been really sexy to me. So I want to be part of the strategy. And in my experience, FP&A is right at the core of that. It's moving the business forward. It's having the critical conversations with business leaders, making decisions, and then so it's all about having impact. How do I do that more efficiently, more effectively, more productively? If I'm having impact, then I feel like I'm doing my job.
Yeah, I love that word, man. I get that same question. And me, when I think about it, it's influence. Like, that's the first eye that comes to my mind. So when you talk about impact too, and, a lot of what we're going to talk about here today are really talking about the people, process, and platform elements around a lot of the things that you've been able to drive at Microsoft and throughout your career. And, talking about it from a people perspective, right? Impact is huge, right? When you think about what FP&A is, right? To me, I've always looked at FP&A in two folds, right? The first fold and the first tranche that we had with FP&A was your traditional financial planning analysis, right? Just by nature, that sounds quantitatively driven, right? That sounds CFO, right? For me, but I think a lot of organizations, and this is what I want to get your perspective on, is we shifted to FP&A 2.0. which is all about financial partnership and advising. That's the next stage of it. So when you talk about impact and how that relates from moving to FP&A 1.0 to 2.0, give us some experiences where you've helped teams that moved, they're traditionally the number crunching to move to more of the partnership and advising. How have you done that at Microsoft?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, that's actually a huge reason why I came to Microsoft, because the vision of the finance leadership at Microsoft was, hey, we've been around as a company for long enough, and we're in a complex and competitive enough business that there's become an appetite for the business to look to finance for more.
Yeah.
So we had this opportunity to say, we are going to really change the way that finance can deliver impact and have influence within the organization. That's when I joined the Microsoft about 13 years ago. We called it Finance 2.0. So very similar to...
Oh, man, look at,
we called that Finance 2.0. How do we rebrand ourselves internally? How do we take a phrase that we would use often is, how do we make sure we're taking a seat at the table?
Yeah.
And the other thing we would say is, how do we switch from becoming an order taker and from becoming the person who's gonna, give you the numbers, to the person who is actually a strategic business partner and a key influencer within the business. And so it's shifting that mindset from I'm like a support role, or I'm somebody who just kind of, puts the numbers in front of you and then says, yeah, do whatever you want, to, no, I'm one of the leaders of the business. And it's my role to advise. It's my role to find opportunities. And that's really modeled by our CFO. If you ever hear Microsoft, an earnings call, our CEO will, talk about, hey, strategically, this is where we're going. This is what happened. But I'm going to have Amy, our CFO, tell you how we're going to do it. Nice. And when the questions come in from the analysts, Satya is amazing. He can handle any question that comes his way, but just as many times he'll turn to his CFO and say, Amy, you walk him through that. Like you talk about our strategy around whatever it might be, our gaming strategy or our devices strategy or our cloud infrastructure strategy. The two of them are so symbiotic that either of them can speak for the other one in any situation. And that's really the model that we've been striving to implement across finance at Microsoft, regardless of who you support. Your job's to be the CFO for that organization. If it's an organization responsible for headcount in your group, then you're the headcount CFO. And that means you own that. You own the decision-making around that, and you own the opportunities to improve that. And so having that CFO mindset instilled down the business, and having this paradigm that we're going to be shifting ourselves up the value chain, is the aspiration that really drives what we do within finance. And it's what fuels all the innovation we're doing, whether it's change management and kind of people and the types of skills that we build. We're really focused on, hey, we expect you, if you're coming into a finance org, we expect you've got the technical finance aspects down.
Of course.
But we're going to be focusing on, do you have the presence that you need to sit in an executive meeting and actually engage, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Are you able to engage with presence? Are you a good storyteller? Can you actually, take all that great analytical firepower that's in your mind? How can you explain that and tell that in a way that is going to help drive decision-making? So we focus a lot on these, higher level executive management type skills and make sure that our finance people are developing them. Because when you match those two things together, then you can really have greater influence and you can have that seat at the table and really help drive the conversation forward.
Jesse, wow, man. I pause because, if you see me looking down, man, I'm taking down the knowledge and wisdom, man, because I hope all those listening out here is equally excited to hear that. I mean, you talked about so many different, pieces of it that I want to kind of go a little deeper down. I think, some of the things you talked about, which is really important for accounting, finance, FP&A teams across the board, right? That transition from that scorekeeping mentality to that valued integrators, that's huge. That's that's so important. And I can't tell you how many times, I do consulting work, even with the teams I help support, right? That scorekeeping that are low on business insights, low on financial efficiency, and you want to move to financial efficiency being high and high on business insights, that's so critical, right? And you can't get to that point without talking about the other thing you just talked about, which I want to dive a little deeper into, which is the art of storytelling. Some of those other skill sets that you're challenging accounting, finance, FP&A people to have. Art of storytelling, how to build partnerships, how to be a strategic advisor, right? I mean, how do you test for that on the CPA exam, right? Tell me a class that I don't remember taking a class that was like business partnership 101 in college, right? But we're asking these people, right? And that's necessary. So on the first level, when you talked about moving the scorekeeping to valued integration, which is that model that you guys are working through in Microsoft, what were some of those like key learning points that you got along the way, right? Like, yeah, these three things were monumental in helping us move from kind of that scorekeeping mentality to be that right hand to that leader, whether you're managing the headcount, to be that right hand to the CEO. Yeah. How did you guys go about doing that?
One of the earliest things we had to get good at was prioritization. And part of that was learning when to say no to your business partners. When we're in that order mentality, then the way that we felt like we're adding value is, hey, if my VP says, I want to see this way, I'm going to do it. I can grab the data. I can put the report together. I can make it really beautiful. Here you go. But sometimes that's not the right thing to do. Sometimes that's really not going to give the VP what they think they want. And so having the ability to say, okay, I know you asked for this thing, but what if we actually did it this other way? And you know what? I've already got that. Here you go. Like, it's ready to go. I don't need to now go spend my weekend putting this thing, because that's usually when it happens too. I've already got a day full of work, and
it's outside of work when you're doing it. It's outside of work when you're doing it. Yeah.
And so if you can understand how to prioritize your time, when to actually push back and say no. In order to do that, you have to know the business. You have to know the priorities of what your VP is trying to achieve. You have to know where the opportunities are. So it becomes very cyclical that you got to start somewhere. But if you never start, you'll never be able to improve anything. Like, you'll just be stuck in this mode of always, saying yes to everything. So usually you don't start with saying no, but you can start with looking at all the stuff that you're doing and thinking, okay, what are the highest value activities that I'm doing that this business won't run if I'm not even doing these things? Okay, great. What's next? And what can I take off of my own plate?
Yep. Balance.
Every year we would go through a very deliberate exercise of trimming out 10 to 20% of our workload.
Interesting.
And just being really, and it was like a management requirement that we did it. Every person was responsible for delivering on simplification because the business is always getting more complex on its own.
Right.
And so it's up to us to take control of our workload and getting really good at that relentless prioritization and identifying, you know what? Yes, that report was really critical for a 3 or 4 month time period. But here we are a year later, and I don't think people are even.
It's not even valuable, yeah.
Right? I don't get emails about it anymore, so I'm gonna try to not send that email and see what happens. And
Jesse, I've done that so many times.
Right?
Yeah. So many times.
And 9 times out of 10, people don't even notice.
They don't even care anymore. They're like, they don't even ask you about that report that you spent like 8 hours doing. Nobody even cares about it anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So you find those opportunities on your own, where you can prune, where can you simplify, what work can you get rid of. That gives you reclaimed time where you can spend getting to know your business better, getting to know the particular, whether it's, the entire business, whether it's your specific function you're supporting, whether it's the department inside the function, like whatever your remit is, you want to get just as smart about that as your VP or your manager or your director, whomever you're working with. And often the only way you can do that is by talking to people, by sitting in meetings, by researching and learning on your own. You can't do any of those things if you're always doing this work that's not going anywhere. So you have to create that time, get smarter about the business. And then when those questions come in, okay, I get it. I know exactly why you would ask that question. And I know exactly where you're going with that. Let me clarify, I want to make sure you want to have good communication.
Definitely.
But let's get aligned on what you're trying to achieve. Now, my job is to get you there as fast as possible. And your idea was good, but let me show you how you can get there even faster. Nice. Or even better, or even differently. So I think that, learning how to prioritize, learning how to say no is a behavior that we had to get good at. And the only way we could do that was by giving up our currency of The way I add value is by saying yes to everything and making my business partner happy. And say, no, no, no. The way I add value is by being a strategic leader. The way I add value is by having true bottom line business impact. And it's up to me to make sure I'm spending my time in ways that are going to do that.
Man, Jesse, that is awesome. That is, that's a fire moment right there. Prioritizing your activities from low value to high value activities. Fire moment right there, man. Thank you for that. I think like that's where so many times like teams struggle. And you mentioned that, right? That prioritization, that ability to know like what is really value add of my time and how do I, because think about it. So many accounting, finance, FP&A teams are so focused on the manual processes, right? The data gathering, the updating this Excel model from the actual model, right? And they spend 80, 90% of the time like this, right? And you need to, I love you guys' approach by really challenging your teams to simplify those moments, right? Simplify your workload so you can prioritize these low value activities outside, prioritize it and shift your time, energy, and effort, passion, talents, all of that to high value activities, right? Now, I think that's a great point that segues into my next one, right? Like you talked about that prioritization to help you guys move. You also mentioned that these new skill sets that FP&A people need to have. You hit the one, I talk about this so much, man. One of the most undervalued, tremendous skill sets for high value, high performance accounting and finance teams is the art of storytelling, right? Like the ability to be able to take all this complexity and tell an operations manager what it means to them and what's in it for them, right? So walk me through how, what are your, like you mentioned, art of storytelling from a people perspective. What are those other, traits that are like, that you've seen at your time at Microsoft or throughout your career that have been hugely valuable from moving the scorekeeper to valued integration? What are some of those additional traits?
Storytelling, CFO mindset, owner mindset. I think somebody who just has a perspective that they don't already have the answer. We'll talk about it in terms of being, a voracious learner or high curiosity quotient. Like there's a lot of ways to illustrate that concept. But I think that voracious appetite for figuring something out and figuring, is there a different angle to this? Is there a different way? Is there something more that I can learn about how the business works or what's going on underneath? Or how do I get the marketing team's perspective on this? Or how do I get a customer perspective on this? Just having that curiosity.
Yeah.
Combined with the humility that says, I might not know the answer. Yeah, I've been in Microsoft for 13 years. I absolutely don't know everything about Microsoft. I don't know everything about how we do finance at Microsoft. I don't know how we do FP&A at Microsoft. There's so much more that I have to learn. And every new experience is an opportunity for me to learn more. We use a term within Microsoft called growth mindset. And it's something that folks over the last few years have really been focusing on. But for us, that's an absolute core to our culture.
Definitely.
Is that we think of ourselves as learners, not knowers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a change within our culture. I would say prior to maybe 5 years ago, the culture at Microsoft was, and especially within finance, was if you're the person in the room who has the answer, you have the most credibility within that room. And the way we would actually test it, this is how we would actually test it. You would come into a financial review, and what our finance slides usually look like at the time was just a bunch of numbers. Like we'd put up a huge wall of numbers because we did everything in Excel. And so we would put up a huge wall of numbers and say, all right, let me walk you through the business, results for this last period.
Yeah.
And the most senior person in the room, maybe they're a sales leader, maybe they're an engineering leader, whomever, the VP or the GM, their role, now this was unspoken, but it happened in almost every single meeting. The most senior person's role in the room was to take a look at all this 100 numbers up on the slide and pick one. and say, tell me about that number.
Wow.
And then, all right, well, how did you get to that number? What's underneath that number? Are you sure it's that? Is it not that? And we called it going to math camp. And it was like the testing ground that you had to go through in the first 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting to prove that I know everything about what's on this slide.
Interesting.
Unless you pass the test, you can't have any influence in that meeting, because what that leader's objective was to stump you and was to show that I know more than you. All right, let's move. We don't need to listen to what you have to say. Let's move on. And so it was this struggle, and it was this challenge, and it was like the gauntlet that everybody had to run through. And it was just accepted as part of our culture. Like, okay,
interesting.
When you're presenting to executives, you've got to be ready to go to math camp, and you've got to know every single number on that slide, inside and out and backwards and forwards. And we got away from that, though. And we realized there's so much inefficiency in that. What's the point of being able to go to math camp live? It doesn't matter. What matters is being able to say, this is what's happening in the business. This is what I know. This is what I don't know yet. Does anybody else? Who knows? Like, what do you think? Let's talk about this. What are we missing? What are our blind spots? Where do we need more data? And that's where we need to make a decision, is around that, not around do it. And so we've been able to shift as a company to, we are here, and the reason why we're meeting is so we can learn. It's not
right.
So what we already know. And if we walk out at the end of this 60 minutes with a list of 5 things that I don't know yet, but I need to know, that is so much more valuable than walking out with the same list that I walked in with. And everybody's saying, yeah, we just talked about stuff we already know. Like, what's the point? That you didn't get anything done in that meeting. And so we've changed that cultural expectation. We don't go to math camp anymore, but and that is really inculcated all across finance, that our objective is to find not just the answers, find the questions, find
that's it.
Have to actually spend our time, because it's finding the questions and then working through them where we're going to find the opportunities.
Definitely. I think being in the trenches, like you talked about it, when you talked about that, throwing numbers, I remember an experience I had at a software company before. And I remember walking in the board meetings and it was exactly what you just said. It was exactly what you just talked about. It was walking into that meeting, and you got all these presentations in there. We would spend the first 45 minutes debating on even which is the right number, right?
Oh, right,
you get sales going there to say, I thought revenue was this number. You get marketing to say it was this number. You get operations that thought it was this number, and just how inefficient that was, right? Because the only reason, to the same point, they're asking that question is to prove that they know the right answer versus like, what does this number mean? Like, how does this drive the business? And you see countless times, so many different organizations and FP&A teams that, like you said, are just focused primarily on the scorekeeping. Putting the numbers on the board. And to me, putting the numbers on the board are important because they help answer, what did we say we're going to do and what do we do, which are great fundamental business questions. But really the meat of it is, what are we going to do about this? Like, what are we going to do about this number that said, we're going to do 10 widgets and we did 8 widgets, right? Yeah. That's the value. That is that piece of it right there. That's the partnerships. That's deep diving into the numbers. That's really the aspect of it that's like super, super important.
Yeah.
So that's really curious that you said that, man.
Yeah. Well, and what you say there too is we would have that exact experience where, because our currency was knowing all the answers, every individual in that room had their own set of answers.
Yeah, everybody
marketing had its own answers. Sales had its own answer. And there was currency in having a different answer than another person in the room. And if you could win the analytical argument why your number was better, then you win.
You won. You
win. I don't know, but you won, and you're the you're able to kind of set that. And what we realized, and this was really led from our CEO, Satya Nadella, when he came into role, said, wait a minute, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to actually come together as one Microsoft and make decisions that are going to help us move faster, make us really respond to opportunities in a more agile way, we can't do that if we're not even agreeing on what the right number is. So whereas up until that point, the answer was always, well, yeah, we're going to always do it this way because this is how we kind of have organizational currency. The Satya's approach was, this is an issue that we actually need to solve. What if we fix that? What if we had a way that every organization, whether you're marketing or sales or finance, had the exact same data?
Yeah.
What if you defined year-over-year growth in the exact same way, so you can't argue about it anymore?
One version of the truth.
Actually spent, and then the answer to that, well, that's because we all have these different perspectives and we're trying to do different objectives. Okay, well, what if you actually spent time to align on that? And what if we saw that there's more value as an organization to be able to look at a problem using the same language? We don't have to have the same perspective on it. We still want to bring our own perspective.
Of course.
We want to bring our own understanding of it, because that's where we can really learn from each other. But let's start with the same language.
Of course.
Now we can actually move the conversation forward. So we spent a year as a company working down at the data level and defining first within finance, okay, what are those metrics that we need to understand business performance, and how exactly are we defining that, all the way down to what system do you need to pull that out of? What's the specific query that you need? How often do you need it? And okay, this is how I'm going to look at the Azure business. Then instead of just saying, yay, we figured it out, to say, okay, marketing, what do you think? Like, this is what we think, and this is how we think you need to tell the story. How do you tell the story? And they say, well, that's great, but I would get rid of these 5 and I would add these 6. And so then we have a conversation and we say,
nice.
How do we come up with an aligned set that we can both feel comfortable, both agree on? And once we get there, then we bring in sales, then we bring in engineering. And over the course of a year, we were able to actually come up with a common set of, we just started with 100 metrics and said, we can use these 100 metrics to talk about our entire business. Whether you're in the US, whether you're in France, whether you're anywhere in the company, you can use just these 100 metrics. And because we know exactly what they are, we know the system that they come from, we know how to pull them out of the system, we can build a review deck that anybody can use, and it's going to be the same conversation. And when you walk into that room, nobody's arguing about the numbers, because everybody agreed that, yep, that's how we're going to pull out the number. So you start the meeting with everybody literally on the same page, and we're able to use that as a learning meeting. And that's how we would start those meetings. Hey, we're here to learn. We're here to understand, where are our gaps? What do we need to be spending our time on to learn more? That's our objective of this meeting. And when you have the CEO saying that, that sets a great tone.
That's like the best tone you can have set, for sure.
Yeah. Right. And so it was kind of a combination both of, how do we do this cultural change and break up this norm of everybody having to have their own answer? And at the same time, how do we leverage technology to enable us to have an aligned conversation to support that cultural objective? So it's very much hand in hand, the cultural change supported by the technology infrastructure to help you really advance.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so enlightening. And the reason why that's like so insightful and enlightening to me is because, like, you guys are Microsoft, bro, and you were able to do that in like a year's time. Like, there's organizations I know that are not even close to the size and scale of Microsoft and just struggle with that, And I think what you mentioned is a good segue, right? You guys had to roll up your sleeves and get into the processes, right? Like, you had to understand, like, hey, as you're building this one version of the truth and you're getting everybody speaking the same language, drinking from the same soup, no more debating on what CAC means to a salesperson versus a marketing person. Like, that's where you got to roll up your sleeves and get into the processes. So talking about processes a little bit, I know that you've done a lot of automation, lead a lot of FP&A transformation. When you were going through that deep dive of understanding, like, hey, how these things move, and when you look at those processes, like, what were your recommendations to, like, if you wanted people to move, when you looked at processes, what were some of those process automation initiatives that you guys were leading and working through that were in business partnerships with other stakeholders in the organization?
Mm-hmm. Well, we looked at using the framework that we always use to identify what should we be working on. It always goes back to, how can we be delivering more impact? That's why I go back to that impact, right? How can we be delivering more impact? How can we be setting the tone and the prioritization for the conversations that need to happen?
Right.
And the only way, again, that we can be doing that is by simplifying, by prioritizing. So we apply that same line of thinking that you do at an individual level as an organization. And so if we look at a big major process like forecasting, for example, something that the entire finance for us, the entire FP&A organization is part of forecasting. You're either responsible for one business unit and you're building the forecast from the ground up for that business unit at super fine levels of detail, and able to, tell the rest of the year, every single product, every single SKU, every single, for us, we call them pricing levels, which is how do you sell to the customer, and lots and lots of granularity. And the reason why you have to use that much granularity is not because it's important to your business partners. Your business partners care maybe 3 layers up, just about 5 products, and that's it. But down the road, when you put that into the financial system needs all that complexity, because we have people at corporate who are responsible for every single individual product. And so if I'm out in a field role, my business is responsible for all of our products. And so we're not going to spend our time individually forecasting thousands of products. We're going to try to focus way up here. But at corporate, we have 1,000 people looking at each of those products. So we have to be able to provide enough detail for them so that we can have this end-to-end forecast that works for everyone. And the way that we used to do that was, well, I guess if that's a level of granularity that you need, sorry, field finance people, you just have to forecast 1,000 data points.
Jeez.
Right?
Jeez.
And what we realized was that, okay, after doing this year after year after year, after cycle, this is, forecast season, you're working all night long, you're working weekends. It's just what you do, because we have to have this much granularity. We realized that, no, we can leverage technology to automate those levels of granularity so that I can focus just on the top 35 products, and I can cascade the rest. I can build a model in the back end that's going to say, okay, if this is the number here, how am I going to cascade that down? Just automate it, whatever, let it go.
Right.
And let go of that piece. And over time, focus more and more on how am I delivering impact in my role as the field finance person responsible for Northeastern United States. Like, we're going to be looking at the business in a particular way. And that's where I can add value into the system, is by focusing on the layer that I have most access and most information on. Anything outside of that, I'm going to use technology to cascade into.
That's so important.
And then vice versa, if I'm in one of these corporate roles where I'm looking at one product across the whole entire world, I'm going to leverage technology as much as I can to simplify what I'm doing. And so, so it's kind of going through a similar process of simplification, of prioritizing where you can have the most value. And you just do that quarter after quarter after quarter relentlessly, because the business is always getting more complex. You always have more products coming online. You always have more sales motions and more things to track. So it's like, every time you cut 10 things off, say, okay, we're not going to do 1,000 products. We're going to group them up into 35 categories. That's great in year 1. But in year 2, you've got to get those 35 categories into 7. And then the year after that, if you can get 7 into 4, that's even better. And let the machine cascade it from 4 to 7 to 35 to 1,000. I don't care how that happens. Just, let the machine do that, because I know the next year 4 is going to turn into 6 because we're launching 2 new products. So there's complexity is always going to keep coming. So we have to relentlessly be pruning and working on simplification. It's something we probably started 6 years ago. We said, we're going to simplify our forecast process. 6 years later, we have the exact same V team. Every single month is always thinking of new ways. How do we simplify our forecast? How do we take cycles out? Even if it feels like it's okay right now, we've got to continue to relentlessly simplify because the world is going to get more complex whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not. And then boom, COVID, here we are.
Ooh, you talk about the biggest complexity of all time. Like nobody, the person that had the pandemic in their forecasting assumption models, they're
right.
No, but I think that boom, man, that's another fire moment right there, man, where we talk about leveraging technology, and you mentioned to it, right? One thing that I'm really getting from you as it's resonating is simplifying, prioritization, leveraging technology in those elements to have your people focused on the high value activities, right? To me, that's always hit something I talked about, which is the decision cycle, right? Processes drive data. Data is then turned into information. Information is shared through knowledge to ultimately make a business decision, right? And where you want to have technology focus is process to information. Like, don't have your people in the process of looking through journal entries to get what expense account this is related to, right? Let technology do all of that. Focus on the collaboration, focus on the knowledge sharing, focus on what it means to the business, focus on the strategic partnership, and ultimately decision making. So it's really insightful to hear that, you guys at Microsoft have taken that, and it's like you've taken it from 2 different angles, right? Like from the field-based approach, you've taken it to say, hey, my challenge to you, field finance person, is to think about simplifying, prioritize, group, focus on the top 80% and let the 20% kind of blah, 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 whatever that is, right? And corporate looking at it from a different way. And that has produced a great way of constantly continuous improvement. But not only that, it's taking continuous improvement a step further to like continual prioritization, which is like a concept. Like I was like, man, I'm super intrigued. Like that's amazing that. And, I think one thing that's for me to always put in perspective to the listeners, like we're talking to Microsoft is doing this, right? Yeah. And I think where a lot of smaller, medium-sized business struggle, they're like, we don't have the resources, or we don't have the technology, or we don't, have the business partnership. And, you guys have built a lot of that already. And it is, right? Jesse, you hit it right on the set. You have to spend that time building those foundation in those areas, right? Because if you don't spend that time, energy in the foundation, it's like a house, right? If you don't spend the time to build out a solid foundation and you try to build the sexy Power BIs and all this automation, you're not going to get the best out of that, right?
And you might put yourself in a worse position because you spend all this time trying to innovate, but none of it lands because we're not agreeing on what the data is. And that's really where we constantly found ourselves 5 or 6 years ago. Like
interesting.
Our entire, I let's see, if this was 5 or 6, that means I spent 8 years at Microsoft having continual experiences of running up that hill as fast as I could and just bam, rolling right back.
Oh, Jesse,
finance trying to say this is a better way to do it and let's do this, but then nope, because we got taken to math camp, or because marketing has a different perspective, or because we can't get access to that data, or this is just the way we've always done it. And we had to, this is definitely not something we've done overnight. Like you said, like we had to start somewhere. And so for us, where it was started, well, let's just, what can we control? What I can control is, what am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? That is going to help me free up some time to get a little bit smarter about, if it takes me 5 days to put together my month-end close package right now, how can I do that faster? How can I, for myself, this was, 8 years ago, how can I leverage a tool like Microsoft Access, which I don't even think exists anymore?
What is that?
Like Power Query today, right? How do I use Power Query to automate all of those different data flows so that all I have to do is push a button and now I got it? That it might take me 2 weeks to figure that out, but every single month going forward, I'm going to save 2 or 3 days.
Definitely.
And if I can do that, now I can start to, and so it's what can you control and where can you start to free up some space? And then over time, it just builds and builds to eventually you can do these great big corporate wide implementations and things. But even today, we still have lots of examples where it's individual people and individual roles saying, you know what, I think this is an opportunity for me to automate this approval process that I have. And I can take this tool called Power Automate and I can set up an automated workflow where, hey, if I get an email with this subject line, it can look at this table and compare these 3 things. It will by itself send an email back and ask for the stuff that they forgot to add. And then it'll say, it can do all that stuff in the background. I don't even have to know about it.
Yeah.
And that way I can get out of the business of doing all of this manual work. Or if I want to, put together a PowerPoint, or if I want to deliver a reporting at the end of the month, like all these things that we have to do in a repetitive way. We have tools to automate that stuff, or we have tools to make instead of me having to send out emails to everybody, I can just through Microsoft Teams post the Power BI report right in there. Everybody can just access it, grab their name, everything they need is right there. We're ready to go. We don't have to be sending around emails. We don't have to be updating SharePoints, like all this work that can just be low value. And at the end of the day, you feel like, gosh, all I did today was refresh reporting. Like,
oh man, that hit me hard. That Jesse, I've been there. That hit me hard in the chest. That was like, ooh, like take a step back on that one. Yeah. But yeah, people spend a lot of time in that, man. And you'd be surprised on like, I think like what's important for the listeners to know is just scale and scope, right? Like you guys have been able to do those things. And I can't tell you how many times, Jesse, I talk with leaders across all different kind of industries, different portfolios. I mean, even myself, I struggle with that, right? Like constantly thinking about, man, we got to make this easier. We got to make this better because really you're spending too much time just gathering a number and not enough time focusing on how that number is driving the business, or focusing, building better partnerships, or focusing on, being more efficient, which are all things that traditionally accounting and finance, we're challenging our teams, right? We're challenging the understanding of what FP&A means to like, you got to get outside of that, man. Leverage technology. So you talked about some tools like Power Automate. Listen, I won't toot my own horn, but I am a Power BI fanboy. I've used the Tableaus, I've used the ClickViews, I've dabbled with ThoughtSpot, I've dabbled with these tools, but I think from a tool perspective, right? Like that, to me, like when I think about that FP&A 2.0, they're like Batman, right? And Batman has his like utility belt, he has his like bat boomerang, and technology is just another one of those tools in that tool belt to access, right? Like automate reporting, get to one version of the truth. So, you talked a little bit about that transformation you guys were able to make by leveraging some of the tools and technologies. What are some other like tools and technologies the listeners could be accessing to move them from scorekeeping, move them to better simplify and prioritize their work streams? What are some other technologies out there that you would recommend?
I think that the more you can leverage, and I'll talk to our own. This is we're talking finance, but I'm in Microsoft, so
yeah, of course, yeah.
So it's also going to be Microsoft focused, but
I mean, I can't think of an accounting and finance person that doesn't use Excel right now. Like, I mean, come on, man. Like, if you want to know the difference between an accounting and finance person, ask them if they know macros. If they know macros, they're definitely a finance person.
Right. Yeah, I would say that in addition to tools like Power BI, and the way that Power BI and Excel have evolved over the last few years is they've completely come together. The data model is exactly the same. So the Power Query data model that now powers anything you're doing in Excel is the exact same model in Power BI. And it's really great because anytime you spend figuring out how do I pull data, how do I manage data, how do I stitch it together, how do I set up automated queries, and how do I transform the data, how do I build any kind of measures on top of any investment that you're putting in the Excel environment, you can leverage immediately in Power BI,
Right.
and vice versa. And so
Right.
what we do now is most of the time we skip the Excel step and we're just working in the Power BI data environment because
Yep.
it's the same thing, but we're able to do just about all of it there. And then that just opens up such an incredible world of being able to you get something set up. You don't have to spend your time rebuilding. You don't have to spend your time reconnecting. You don't have to spend your time redefining, okay, year over year equals this month minus that month. And no, it's just in the data set. You just pull it right out and go. In addition to that, Power Automate is a great suite of tools that lets you look at any of the workflows that you're involved in, approval workflows, check-ins of like forecast models and stuff. Okay, your job is to take a forecast model, input your assumptions, and then put it up on the SharePoint. And then somebody in a central location has to be monitoring the SharePoint and when's it come in and is it updated or not. There's a workflow like that you're managing centrally. You can just automate all that stuff.
Automate it. Yeah, I love it.
Lets you just automate. That's an FP&A example. There are tons of examples in any of the back office functions.
Oh, without a doubt.
Automation is just so incredibly valuable. Machine learning is an incredible tool that is getting easier and easier for finance people to access. And you can access it right in Excel now. You can access it right in Power BI now, where we have artificial intelligence projection built in to that tool. And so you can start to say, hey, I can try to figure out what are the right inputs, and if I can provide Excel or Power BI with a robust data set, I can spend some time in that environment training it up, and it can help me make a better projection going forward. Just 2 years ago, you'd have to know how to leverage some kind of third party.
Yeah, like R, Python. You have to know that. Yeah.
And there are still lots of applications where if you're going to do something enterprise grade, you should have a data scientist involved. But increasingly, we're putting that capability directly into the hands of finance people. The other tool that I think is super, super valuable for us, like if we think about how did we manage to run finance remotely? The only way we were able to do that was for us using Microsoft Teams.
Right.
For all of our meetings, for all of our document management, for all of our conversations that we had. There are other products out there that do similar collaboration platforms, but for us, Microsoft Teams has become the way we run finance. So if we're running a forecast, then there is a team set up for Q4 forecast, and anybody involved in that process is part of that team. Any announcements that need to come out, if you have a meeting, you have it in that Teams channel so that all the questions and all the files and everything is right there in that space. I know exactly where I need to go to get it. There's a SharePoint that's just built. I don't have to know how to build the SharePoint. It's already there. It's given to you, and you set up a team, you're given a file share. And now I don't know how much time we would spend
on the versions through emails. Oh man,
emails running back and forth.
You're like, which one's the right one, right? You're like, is the version from yesterday the right one? Is this one
a disaster, right? And it just doesn't happen anymore because Teams manages all that in the back end, makes it so simple. Now I can go into a document and I can see 5 other people are in that same document, and all I have to do is say, only show my changes to me. And now the document's smart enough that it's going to, as long as we're not changing the same cell. So we do have to have some governance around, okay, you're responsible for this part, you're responsible for this part. As long as we're not literally changing the same cell, we can have as many people as we want in the same Excel workbook.
Yep.
Updating it and working on our models and this kind of thing. So all the document management, all the version control, all the collaboration is all in one space now. And that has made it so much more, made us so much more efficient. What we're working on right now as an organization is how do we reduce the number of meetings that we have? Because we got to the point where we say, hey, we can actually do finance or business outside of the office. And we've learned, especially over the last couple of months, is we've gotten into this habit of setting up a meeting for everything and inviting everybody to the meeting, because it's so easy to do. You just add them to the invite and boom, they're there. And it doesn't matter where they are in the country, doesn't matter where they are in the year, or where they are in the world, what location or what time zone they're in, whatever, add them to the meeting. And we've realized that we're killing ourselves because you start the day with 10 hours of meetings. When are you going to get your work done?
Yes.
And so we realized we've got to get smarter about how we're able to make decisions, how we're able to communicate without having to call a meeting. And for us, that's being able to leverage the instant messaging and the chat and the document control. That's all for us right there inside of Teams. And so having a platform like that can enable you to collaborate in a really efficient way is super, super important.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head, man. Another fire moment right there, man. And I think it's beyond just the tools, right? And I think if you really put it in perspective, what you just articulated, Jesse, is finance and accounting, irregardless of tech stack that you're in, if you're using Tableau, whatever the case may be, we have to look beyond the traditional data analysis, budgeting, forecasting tools that that's on our tool belt. We have to look at productivity across the entire organization. Because like you said, we're tasked with collaborating with people outside of finance. We're tasked with collaborating with people in different time zones, right? We're all this situation now has forced organizations to, be productive where you're not physically in the same space. So I think what you just articulated, right, is finance and accounting have to think outside of how you're leveraging technology, not only to get your work done, but how you can leverage technology to be more collaborative, to be more insightful and be more efficient, how you can be more automated, right? So, it's really challenging that this is the tech stack we use in accounting and finance and nobody else uses it, right? Like, you got to branch that out because like you said, there's other solutions out there, but finding the right way to have that cadence, that collaboration, that knowledge sharing, that one version of the truth, and making sure you have a consistent technology like Microsoft Teams or Power BI or Automate. Those are just even further steps to continue to help you move along from scorekeeping to valued advisors in the business, right? And I think where I get in conversations, and for those listeners that, maybe that small to medium-sized organization, and, they're like, well, Chris, we don't have the ability to be able to have the teams that, Microsoft and stuff has. But at the same time, you don't have to start with monumental investment. Start with I like the way that you mentioned, and start with looking at your processes and finding ways to make it better. Maybe one thing you tackle in a quarter is we want to be better business partners. How do we take our processes? How do we look at our people, right, that we have in place? Do we have the right people in place to build a partnership environment? I think, that's one thing that you mentioned is maybe 5, 8 years ago, it wasn't the right people in positions to articulate the value proposition FP&A needed to have, right? And you needed to fit the right people in place. So for me, for those listeners, it's always about looking at the people, the processes, the platform, i.e. the technology. And I love you guys' approach. It's like a continued Kaizen-based approach from all different levels of the organization, from the CEO down to the field finance person. I think without that clarity on the importance of why that has to happen and the support across from the C-level suite down, that's what made it super successful. So, man, I think you've mentioned so many great points, and we've had a chance to talk through about the people side. We talked about the process side. We touched on the technology. And kind of wrapping up, I wonder what's that last piece of knowledge, that last piece of advice? What are some parting words you want to share with all the listeners as they begin to, obviously take the deep dive through this and understand how you guys have prioritized, how you made those transitions? What are some of those parting words, insights, or suggestions you want to give our listeners?
Yeah, I'm going to maybe throw you a curveball. But for me, I've really reflected on this a lot over the last few months. And if I think about the meeting we had today with our global CFO meeting, it's about people, and it's about every person in finance has a life outside of their job. And when I think about having impact, the reason why I get so excited about doing digital transformation and freeing up time, part of that, is so that you can do better with your business partner. But a huge part of it is so that you can actually go home, and you can be home when you're home, and you can be with the people that are most important to you. You can do the things that make you who you are. That is a huge motivation for me to be pushing the envelope of what can we be doing in finance. It's about having impact across your whole life, really. And so for me, it's just that. It's just realizing that it's not just about technology for technology's sake. It's not about, finance for finance sake. It's about how do we be more whole, real, authentic people. Finance is an incredible vehicle. It's an incredible career. You get to work with people. You get to solve problems. You get to be kind of on the cutting edge of technology as well as business. And there's so much. This is why we're all in finance, because there's so much cool to do about it. But the more that I can do to enable you to get that work done as efficiently and productively as you can, I hope that I'm also able to give you back some of your life so that you can be a person outside of your finance role. So,
Jesse, man, I think, first off, man, that was really, I took that's strong. I think, kind of like if I was to answer that question and kind of, my parting words to the listeners and things like that is we have to understand right now in the critical phase we're in as accounting finance leaders, that behind every decision that we make inside of an organization is people, right? Yeah. And I think taking that empathetic, data-driven decision-making mentality is like the next level that CFOs need to go to, right? Yeah. Because across the board, right, businesses across the board across the world are faced with challenging decisions that they have to make. And I think it's our job as taking that next step further is knowing that behind everything that you just mentioned, right, is people. People are impacted by that. So making sure you have the most efficient process, making sure you have the most accurate data, right? And, I think as I, part off to the listeners, and this is my challenge to the listeners that are listening, right? The legacy we're leaving, right? This is like a transformative time across the board in FP&A to really leave a long-lasting legacy on what we contributed through the difficult times to our organization, how we supported our people, how transparent we were. And like you said, man, how we worked hard to make people's lives a better balance as we go into this, situation and continue to evolve through it. So Jesse, man, thank you so much for your time. Before we part off to the listeners, is there any like social media things you want people to follow you on, or LinkedIn, Twitter?
Right. I'm right there on LinkedIn. I do a lot of lurking on Twitter. You can find me just Jesse Todd, Microsoft, LinkedIn. You'll find me there. I have just an open invitation. Any organization out there, if you want to know a little bit more, how do you do finance at Microsoft? How have you worked through some of these challenges? Like I think I mentioned at some point, we think of ourselves within finance as we're part of a broader community than just inside Microsoft. It's borderless. And so anything that I can be doing to help you in your organization getting farther ahead faster, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can, whether it's having our finance teams meet together. I talk a lot with lots and lots of finance organizations at all different levels about a lot of these topics. So feel free to reach out. That's how you get me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jesse, and thank you for that. You listeners definitely take him up on it. I have my notes here that I was taking, and you know, I may take you up on that, Jesse, and then get some knowledge from you outside. So Jesse, thank you so much. I want to thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for the listeners out there. For all the listeners, make sure you follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We'll drop the links in the video. Jesse, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your perspective. And thank you for being part of Collective Conversations. And this is Chris Ortega, Collective Conversations, closing it off. Hope you guys are all safe and well. And tune in to the next Collective Conversation. Thanks, Jesse.